Rain drizzled softly onto the cracked asphalt of Devon Road, tracing silvery veins along the edges of the sidewalk where a single, blue canvas bag lay motionless in the gutter, its wet papers bleeding ink into the storm drain. At exactly 6:47 a.m., on the cold morning of September 16th, 13-year-old Maeve Donnelly vanished without a sound, just 2 houses short of finishing her route. She had delivered newspapers from her bike every morning for the past 8 months without fail. But that Thursday, something interrupted her ritual. Something precise, something calculated. Before the sky fully broke into dawn, Maeve was gone as if she had been folded into the mist, the hum of early traffic, swallowing any trace of her passing. There were no screams, no witnesses, only the faint metallic scrape of a bicycle chain swinging in the breeze, and a silence so sharp it seemed to pierce the bones of the sleeping neighborhood. And in that silence, a question began to rot beneath the surface. Was Maeve Donnelly taken, or did she choose to disappear? Maeve's last known sighting came from the amber-tinted footage of a neighbor's doorbell camera, time-stamped at 6:43 a.m. She appears in the frame wearing a red hoodie, her hood pulled tight against the drizzle, her face downturned, unreadable. The camera captures the faint whir of bicycle tires, the rhythmic toss of newspapers, and then she slips out of view, rolling toward the bend in the road just past the hollow cedar tree. That tree would soon become the centerpiece of whispered speculation, with its twisted branches casting long claw-like shadows across the sidewalk, as though reaching for something or someone. Minutes later, another camera farther down the street failed to pick her up. It was as if she had evaporated between one frame and the next. A 5-minute gap, a corner of the world no longer under watch. And in that blind spot, the life of a child unraveled into mystery. Maeve's bicycle was found the same morning, lying on its side like a broken-winged bird near the storm drain at the bottom of Devon Road. Its back wheel was still spinning slowly when the first officer arrived, an eerie metronome ticking in the wind. The canvas bag was slumped beside it, damp and deflated. The last 3 newspapers never delivered. Not a single footprint marked the pavement near the bike. No drag marks, no tire tracks but her own. Officer Lakshmi Patel, first on the scene, would later describe the moment as too clean to be real. She noted the unbroken glass on the empty sidewalk, the undisturbed gravel, the haunting stillness. As if Maeve had simply disintegrated, atom by atom. But just beyond the curb, where the low hedge met the edge of the neighbor's yard, there was a scrap of fabric caught in the bramble, a corner torn from a red hoodie, identical in color to the one Maeve had been wearing. The discovery of that torn scrap shifted the investigation from a missing person case to a potential abduction, igniting a quiet panic beneath the surface of the tight-knit community. By late afternoon, the scent dogs arrived, trained noses tracing the perimeter of Maeve's known path. They paused at the hedge, lingering, confused, circling once before losing her scent entirely near the side fence of the Elridge property, a once proud colonial home slowly decaying in shade and time. There, the trail abruptly ended, as though Maeve had been lifted out of the world. The Elridges had been gone for over a year, their house swallowed by ivy and silence. But what made the officers pause was not the broken window sealed with plywood or the overgrown path curling past the porch. It was the faint sound from within, a rhythmic tapping, 4 slow knocks, and then nothing, just the wind and the first breathless ripple of dread that something much darker had taken root on Devon Road. Detectives entered the Elridge house just before sunset, flashlights cutting ribbons through the dust-choked gloom. The air inside was stagnant with abandonment, thick with the sweetness of rot and the faint, medicinal sting of damp decay. Wallpaper curled from the corners like peeling skin. Floorboards moaned beneath careful steps. In the living room stood a child's chair, pink, faded, moth-eaten, its fabric patterned with tiny clouds. Who had brought it here? Why was it facing the boarded-up window? In the soot-dusted fireplace was something worse. A small pile of ash undisturbed by wind, unmistakably fresh among the decade-old soot. Within it, a ring of partially burned paper revealed the singed edge of a newspaper. The front page, half crisped by fire, read in ghosted lettering, September 16th, 2021, Maeve's final delivery. That silent, forgotten room was breathing secrets. And somewhere in those ashen remains, officers began to suspect Maeve had been inside that house, and perhaps she was still closer than anyone dared imagine. As forensics swept the Elridge house under the waning veil of twilight, something insidious unfolded from within the bedroom closet, a low crawl space hidden behind warped plaster and shadow. It was no wider than a suitcase, its threshold scraped raw, as if something or someone had passed through recently. Inside, beneath a heap of yellowed blankets and mildew-stained boxes, officers discovered a cracked Polaroid camera wrapped in plastic, its lens fogged and warped. When developed, 8 photos emerged, each a shard of chilled silence. The first, Maeve on her bicycle, smiling in the soft light of dawn. The second, Maeve near the hollow cedar tree. But by the third frame, she was no longer looking at the camera, she was looking past it, eyes wide, mouth parted in fear. The last image showed only the cedar's silhouette in darkness, a long figure standing among the roots. No face, no detail, just presence, a shape where it should not have been. And suddenly, the question that had haunted Devon Road gained weight like thunder in a bottle. Who had been watching Maeve Donnelly that morning, and why did they stop filming? The Polaroids were sent to a forensic lab in Richmond, coaxing every fleck of detail from their murky surfaces. Analysts enhanced the final image, adjusting exposure, amplifying contrast, chasing shadows for answers. But what emerged wasn't clarity, it was deeper uncertainty. The figure by the cedar seemed to wear something long and dark, a trench coat or robe, impossible to say. Its shape distorted unnaturally at the edges, as if caught mid-motion or refracted through shattered glass. But what chilled the room full of hardened investigators was found on the 5th photo, almost missed in the blurred background behind Maeve. A window on the 2nd floor of the Elridge house reflected the same figure, same outline, same impossible presence. But this frame predated the others. The figure hadn't appeared suddenly. It had been there, silently, even before the cedar, watching, waiting. The watchers had been watched, and Maeve had unknowingly ridden into a story already being written long before she disappeared. Detectives pored over the Polaroids with a reverence usually reserved for relics or deathbed confessions. These were more than photographs, they were time-stamped echoes of a child teetering on the edge of vanishment. Investigators reconstructed the timeline again and again, hours bleeding into sleepless nights. Who had access to an old-school camera in 2021? Who would develop film in an era overtaken by digital speed unless they intended to keep these images hidden, untraceable? The presence of the photos, their eerie composition, suggested intention. Someone had been close enough to capture moments inches away from terror. But one question reared its head behind every theory like a thorn through fabric. How did they know where Maeve would be that morning? Her route wasn't random, it was ritual. But rituals can be learned. And someone, it seemed, had been studying her. Not for days, for weeks, maybe longer. The weight of that paranoia settled across Devon Road like fog that refused to lift, thick, clinging, and full of things you could almost see if you dared to look long enough. It wasn't until Detective Marlowe revisited the library archives that a new lead emerged, one born not from evidence, but from eerie symmetry. In the stacks of local newspapers dating back to the late 1980s, he uncovered a forgotten headline buried in the back pages. 14-year, old boy missing on Devon Road, last seen near Hollow Tree. The accompanying photo was sepia-faded, the boy's smile ghostly beneath the grain. His name was Nathaniel Bristow. Like Maeve, he disappeared without a trace during his morning paper route on a drizzling September morning. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Both were young paper carriers. Both disappeared near the hollow cedar. Both cases remained unsolved. What made the coincidence more disturbing was the date. Nathaniel vanished on September 16th, 1987, exactly 34 years to the day before Maeve. The Paisley pattern of tragedy was repeating itself. And deep in the back end of history, it whispered a chilling idea. Perhaps Maeve wasn't the first child to be taken on Devon Road, and unless the pattern was broken, she wouldn't be the last. Suddenly, the investigation was no longer confined to the present. Devon Road had become a palimpsest of sorrow, where childhoods vanished beneath layers of autumn rain and silence. Detective Marlowe, unsettled by the eerie echo across decades, sought out the Bristow case file brittle with time and contemptuously thin. But there, in a yellowed interview transcript, lay a curious detail. A neighbor, long dismissed as senile, claimed they'd seen a man in a dark coat standing under the cedar, hours before Nathaniel disappeared. Her words had been laughed off then, filed under confusion and fear, but now her description mirrored the same silhouette in the Polaroid. The figure had haunted this street before. It had waited by the same tree. And if memory failed to warn the living, then perhaps it was because something wanted to be forgotten. The line between past and present had dissolved. Whatever had taken Nathaniel was not just history. It had returned. Or worse, it had never left. By mid-October, as autumn curled its fingers tighter around the town, the community's thin veil of normalcy finally ruptured. Parents who once waved from porches now shadowed their children at crosswalks. School buses ran half-empty. Rumors multiplied like spores of disappearances older than memory, of coded messages in the newspaper's arrangement, of whispers heard under that twisted cedar at night. Some said the tree marked more than coincidence. They believed it to be a wound in the world, a thin place where old tragedies seeped through. And while police emphasized logic, warning the public not to speculate, privately, even the most skeptical among them could no longer explain away the convergence of signs. A silent panic had taken residence, fed by the unanswered calls, the photographs that saw too much, and the names that vanished into the hush just before dawn. Something had closed its hand around Devon Road. And whatever it was patient, it was deliberate, and it was far from finished. The town council convened an emergency meeting under flickering gymnasium lights, voices tightly coiled with uncertainty. Though the official line was safety measures, the undertone reeked of desperation. Flyers with Maeve's face were updated weekly, fresh ink masking stale hope. But behind the posters and search parties, uneasy alliances began to form in secret. A group of parents, including Maeve's mother Claire, began meeting at night, sharing stories and histories that had been buried under years of shame and disbelief. One woman admitted her sister had gone missing in 1973 on the same block, under the same tree. No police report had been filed, no search ever conducted. She was only 7. Her name long forgotten by official record, but never by her family. Every generation had one, it seemed, a child swallowed by silence. And suddenly, Devon Road wasn't a street anymore. It was a wound that reopened every 34 years, bleeding innocence, choking truth, leaving nothing behind but the bitter taste of questions that dared not be spoken aloud. One night, as wind howled low across the rooftops and tree branches scraped against window panes like dead fingers, Claire Donnelly stood alone beside the cedar, her daughter's red hoodie folded tight in her grip. She had returned to the place where the air felt thinner, where time seemed to collapse inward. In the brittle hush, she whispered Maeve's name, not in desperation, but in invocation, a defiance against the silence, a protest against forgetting. Just as she turned to leave, her eyes caught something tucked between the tree's roots, a thin, dirt-smeared envelope sealed in wax. Trembling, she unfastened it. Inside was a photograph. Unlike the Polaroids, this one was newer, printed digitally full color. Maeve, in a dimly lit basement, eyes wide but alive, pressed her hand against the camera lens. She was alive, or had been, when the photo was taken. On the back, in looping handwriting, 34 years is too long to wait. This time I want them to see. The message rewrote everything. Whoever had taken Maeve wasn't hiding anymore. They were beginning to speak. And the game, now, had only just begun. The basement shown in the photo became the investigators' new North Star. All resources pivoted toward identifying that space lighting, concrete, ductwork, any traceable element. Specialists combed the image pixel by pixel, and in a stunning twist, the breakthrough came not from law enforcement but a retired HVAC technician watching the story unfold on local news. He recognized the unique paneling behind Maeve. He'd installed a custom ventilation system like it decades ago, only in one house. The Langford residence, 2 miles outside town, long since foreclosed and left to rot beneath the yew trees. Within hours, a tactical team breached the sun-starved home. Mildewed wallpaper peeled under their feet. The air inside was sour with damp and faintly electric. They tore through floorboards, cracked open locked doors, and then at the far end of the basement, behind a wall layered in painted drywall, they found it. The cell, a room so quiet, so cruelly constructed it felt more like a memory than a place. And on the far wall, words scratched in trembling marks. "I can still hear the cedar." Maeve wasn't there. But something else was. A mattress still warm, a tin lunchbox half filled, and pinned above it all, a color photo of 10 children smiling in the same red hoodie. None of them were Maeve, and none had ever been reported missing. The photo of the 10 unknown children dressed like Maeve, posed like a memory someone refused to release, sent a chill deeper than any single disappearance. The image had not been pinned gently. It was stabbed to the wall with a rusted awl, as if their smiles needed to be fixed in place, unwilling or unable to escape. One of the children's eyes had been scratched out with a blade. Another's name, Lena, was written faintly across a shirt collar, the ink faded by time or intention. Forensic attempts to identify them yielded hollow results. No matches on missing children databases, no family claims. It was like they'd never existed. And yet, every detail in that photograph, shoes scuffed with use, shoelaces knotted the way only a child would, screamed of reality. These were not ghosts. They were forgotten lives. And for the first time, investigators were forced to confront something beyond the criminal, beyond the procedural. This was ritual, a pattern bound not by impulse, but by sacred consistency. Someone had been collecting children, not all at once, not for ransom, but methodically, generationally, like offerings. And the hollow cedar, ever silent, ever watching, stood not as a landmark, but perhaps as a monument to that ancient promise given, taken, given again. Maeve's case had cracked the door to something monstrous, and that door was opening wider. Pressure swelled like fever beneath the town's surface, the air feverish with theory and dread. Maeve's name echoed across dinner tables and school hallways, twisting into myth before the truth could anchor. And then another turn. A late-night call from the Langford property, the site still under surveillance, where a motion-activated camera caught movement. Grainy footage showed a figure entering the basement, not stealthy, but careful, measured. He wore the same long coat, same fractured silhouette as the figure in the photograph. But this time, as he turned toward the lens, something emerged in the frame that hadn't before a face. A man, perhaps in his 50s, hollowed cheeks, eyes glassy with the vacancy of ritual, and, in his hand, what appeared to be another red hoodie, fresh, unworn. Authorities released the still at dawn, hoping for identification. Instead, they received something else, dozens of anonymous letters mailed from across the country, all containing the same phrase written in blocky, deliberate script: "He is not one man. He never was." The tree remembers. Maeve's vanishing had torn a hole in the veil, and now secrets long buried by time and fear were clawing their way into the light. Whatever waited beneath the cedar was older than morning, older than any name, and it had just begun to wake. In the days that followed, the man in the photograph was never seen again. No name surfaced, no records matched. Forensic artists reconstructed his face, broadcasting composite sketches across state lines, but all leads dissolved into silence. The Langford house was sealed, then demolished, but even in rubble, people swore the ground pulsed with something old, like heartbeat in stone. Maeve's case remained officially open, but unofficially it became something heavier, an elegy, an unfinished psalm whispered as children passed the hollow cedar on their way to school. The root-strewn soil remained undisturbed, but locals left offerings now: red ribbons, paper cranes, sometimes a folded hoodie, no bigger than a breath. And though Claire Donnelly kept her porch light on each night, she no longer waited in the window. Instead, she stitched her daughter's name into blankets sent to shelters across the state, fragments of love scattered like seeds against forgetting. Because the truth, as Devon Road would remember it, was this: evil is not always loud. Sometimes it is patient and wears the face you miss the most. And sometimes it waits under trees, counting years instead of days, whispering through the rain. And when it takes, it does not always kill, but it always leaves a hole that speaks. Spring came to Devon Road like it always did, too slowly, and yet not slow enough. The cedar tree bloomed again, as it had every year, unfazed by what it had hidden, or what had been done in its name. But beneath its gnarled shadow, the town no longer walked the same path. Sensor lights now bordered intersections. Morning paper routes were rerouted or reassigned. And for the first time in decades, the local paper ran a front-page piece, not on loss, but on names being remembered, spoken aloud, inscribed on metal plaques beneath the cedar's roots. Maeve Donnelly, Nathaniel Bristow, Lena, and 7 others still unnamed. The monument said only, "We saw them, we will not forget." No one knew who placed it there or on what authority, but no one dared remove it, because some truths are not meant to fade. Some echoes must ring until the silence has been silenced. And somewhere far from Devon Road, in a place unnamed and unseen, a light flickered in a basement, a camera blinked red, and a drawer slid closed over a stack of red hoodies folded with unnatural care. The pattern had been disturbed, but not ended. The cedar tree still leaned into the street, its limbs curled like fingers around fading sky, and though it no longer whispered, the air beneath it held a promise, until the next one. But even as time pressed forward, and grass grew over forgotten footprints, something stirred uneasily in the spaces no one would dare name. Weekly, the Donnellys still received unsigned envelopes, drawings, maps, pages torn from children's books annotated in red ink, all marked only with a date. Some were from the past, some, impossibly, from the future. Local kids whispered of a man who walked the neighborhood at dawn, long before light touched the trees, humming lullabies from no known time. Parents shut windows with trembling hands when fog rolled too thick, claiming they heard tapping beneath the cedar, rhythmic and pleading. By the next equinox, another hoodie had been found child-sized, red, wet with dew, hanging from the park's swing set at the edge of town. No child was reported missing. Yet, Devon Road had grown quieter, not safer. The monument beneath the tree remained polished, untouched by law or weather. Because though the town dared to hope, somewhere in its marrow, it had learned the truth. Monsters do not vanish, they recede, and patterns do not end, they sleep. And yet, even in the shadows, there flickered defiance. Claire planted wildflowers around the cedar's base that spring, their roots tangling with memory, their petals swallowing sorrow. Survivors of silence began to gather each year on the same date, bringing candles and whispering names aloud, as though speaking them built a wall between now and what waited just beyond. Some carried photos, some carried nothing but ache. Still, they came. And, across town, a once quiet archive had begun collecting the fragments, drawings, photos, stories, timelines, everything. Too strange for police, but too heavy for forgetting, they named it the Hollow. Not a place of answers, but of witness. Because the cycle could not be broken until it was seen by all. Maeve's disappearance, Nathaniel's fading photo, the girl from 1973, Lena's scratched name. They now lived here, not in fear, but in memory sharpened into action. And somewhere, the camera blinked back to life in a different forgotten room, its lens steady, red light unblinking, as a new child stepped unknowingly into frame. The cedar does not forget, but now neither does the world. Years passed, but the scars of Devon Road bled slow and silent. Trees regrew where fences once kept danger out, and children once again filled the streets with the sound of laughter, though none ventured near the cedar alone. The Donnellys moved away, quietly, as most grieved families do, taking nothing but photos, leaving behind the echoes. The Elridge house was turned into a park, its soil blessed but never dug too deep. And the hollow, its archives swelling with handwritten notes, tapes, and trembling truths, became a whispered legend of its own, even as a new librarian took careful inventory of a growing, restless archive. One crisp morning, tucked between two donated books, she found another photograph, faded, misaligned, the edges ragged. A group of children, none known, none yet missing, but one wore Maeve's broken smile, and the same red hoodie they swore had been buried. Scratchy handwriting below read only, "You remember now, that's enough, for a while." And that word while stretched with unbearable weight, because stories like these don't end. They bend. They wind like roots beneath forgotten houses and echo in basements where no one's supposed to go. Maeve's story doesn't close, it lingers. And the cedar crooked, timeless patient stands waiting, its shadow long and growing. Summer returned to Devon Road with a cruel kind of beauty sunlight spilled across the crooked pavement. Children's laughter returned to backyards muffled through white curtains. And time, ever faithful to the forgetting of pain, moved forward. And yet, beneath the cedar, shadows lingered longer than they should have. At dusk, its shape cast across the street like a warning in silhouette. Those who had once feared still remembered, and those who were too young to recall began asking questions. The town's surface shimmered with false calm, but within the hollow, pages turned. A new entry appeared unsigned, thick with dust, its ink too fresh. It detailed names not yet spoken publicly, locations not yet searched, patterns that pointed not only backward but outward, across counties, across decades. This was never just Devon Road. It had always been bigger. But now, someone within the archive began threading strings across the maps, following the pulse of the pattern, daring to predict the next bloom of silence before it arrived. Somewhere, far from the weary hush of that street, red thread tightened on a fresh thumbtack. And somewhere else, beneath a different old tree in a town not yet afraid, a child woke at dawn, pulled on a red hoodie, and reached for her bicycle. The pattern stirs, the shadow of the cedar travels. And where stories bend, no one is truly safe, only spared for now. And so the story waits, half buried, half breathing in the quiet dark between facts and fear, where red hoodies hang like grief incarnate and names echo through the folds of time. Maeve Donnelly remains missing, but not forgotten. Her face, like so many others erased too early, lives in drawings taped to refrigerators, in campfire retellings, in the jagged breath of a mother who no longer cries but simply listens for footsteps that never come. Devon Road sleeps, but not soundly. The cedar's shadow lies across the town like a shroud, growing only with memory. And in dim corners, candles flicker against walls plastered with timelines, hoping to burn long enough to stop the next vanishing before it begins. Because somewhere, the camera is still blinking, the drawer still closing, the rituals still churning in silence. Patterns like these do not end with answers, they only begin again. And though the roots stretch far now, deeper and wider, someone is finally watching them back. And somewhere, in a town where the sky falls different and memories settle into walls like dust, a flicker on a hidden lens catches movement once more. A boy this time, no older than 13, his hair matted from sleep, eyes still threaded with dreams. He stands at a window, unsure why he woke, drawn by a sound he cannot name, tapping perhaps, or the hush of leaves whispering just beneath the floorboards. Behind him, a neatly folded red hoodie waits patiently on a wooden chair. He turns, drawn not by fear but by something older, something that hums in the marrow. Outside, the street is empty but not still. A breeze moves without wind. the trees sway without reason. The cedar may not yet stand here, but its shadow has arrived, stretching across thresholds unseen. And as the boy steps forward, hands slowly reaching for the hoodie, somewhere far beyond this moment, in a basement breathing with ghosts, the red light of a camera glows once more, steady, expectant. The story is beginning again. It always does. And so it begins again, not just as echo, but as inheritance. Across the country, the archives of the Hollow swell with unfamiliar names beginning to feel too familiar. More red hoodies, more grainy photos with impossible timestamps, more shadows standing where children once stood free. Task forces merge only to dissolve in bureaucratic delays. Witnesses drift back into silence. But still, the pages are written. Still, the thread is traced. Because although the cedar has roots in Devon, its seeds carried elsewhere unnoticed, unfeared. The watchers multiply. The rituals refine. And what began as one girl's disappearance grows into a cartography of grief drawn across generations. Yet in that quiet terror, a resistance hardens. A network forms. Survivors, believers, broken families, fighting not for closure, but interruption. To fracture the rhythm, to make it forget its timing. For though the shadow of the cedar cannot be burned, it can be named. And naming is where the forgetting ends. This is not a conclusion, it is a reckoning. And somewhere, someone has just placed a red hoodie down, but not to wear, to watch. Because now, the hunted have learned to stare back. And beneath a bruised sky, where dusk unfurled like ink in water, a forgotten town in another state, stirred in quiet premonition. A librarian in Carter's Hollow, North Dakota, cataloging donations for the town's centennial exhibit, found an unmarked envelope tucked into the cover of a 1934 agriculture ledger. Inside, 10 more photographs. Children again, red hoodies again. One photo, dated only with a question mark, showed the edge of a street sign, Devon Road, but the landscape was barren, the trees skeletal. The librarian glanced toward the old tree outside her window, one never planted, merely found when the library was built. Bent slightly, bark carved with sigils long faded. No one knew who marked it. She stared at the photo, then at the tree, and she whispered without meaning to, it followed. Because this wasn't the end. It had never been. The pattern hadn't just stirred, it had grown teeth. And now, from town to town, child to child, silence to silence, the cedar was beginning to flower. And somewhere under the roots of another tree, quiet, crooked, and nameless, something ancient resumed its counting. The winds carried lullabies older than language, the soil cradled secrets no one dared exhume. Inside the hollow, now spread to remote corners of the nation, like veins through bone, a calling had begun to sound louder than the myth one woven of timelines, red threads, code fragments, songs remembered only by those who should not have survived. The original cedar, scarred but unfallen, stood not only as sentinel, but as mirror reflecting the world's quiet complicity in forgetting. Maeve Donnelly's face still lingered on hallway corkboards, now joined by dozens more. Nathaniel Bristow's smile found new life in mural paint. Mothers set empty plates where no names had yet been written, and deep underground, behind one more wall waiting to be broken, a final grainy tape rolled. It showed neither horror nor salvation, just a door, cracked open slightly, and the sound of breathing on the other side. Time itself seemed to stall, because whatever lies behind that door isn't new. It's return, and somewhere, someone is still counting. 34 years, one child, one tree. Again, again, again. The wind howled low and mournful on the 34th anniversary of Nathaniel Bristow's disappearance, brushing through the cedar's branches like fingers sifting through old wounds. A crowd gathered beneath its crooked limbs, not in official recognition, but reverent rebellion. Dozens stood clutching candles, scraps of photographs, whispered memories. Some had lost no one, but felt the echo. Some came because they had heard the humming, the stories, the name Maeve carried like a flame into the dark. In the stillness, Claire Donnelly stepped forward, holding the first red hoodie ever found. She didn't speak of closure. She read names, slowly, clearly. With every name, others lit their candles. Lena, Nathaniel, Ezra, Danny, Kai, Maeve. The air shimmered with grief and defiance. Beneath their feet, the earth held its breath, listening. Far away, in a room choked with reels and static, screen after screen blinked on new names, new places, the cycle swelling anew. But for this moment, on this street, the silence was claimed by the living, and the cedar, for once, was quiet. But even silence is not surrender, it is a pause before the next reckoning. In the months that followed, children gathered under the cedar no longer as bystanders, but as keepers of its memory. They stitched red onto backpacks, chalked names onto sidewalks, scrawled questions into their notebooks, daring to speak what had once been forbidden. Teachers incorporated the hollow into local history courses. Survivors gave lectures in gymnasiums once haunted by unanswered prayers, and across towns bearing scars they hadn't realized they carried, flickers of awareness began to root themselves. This was not a tale of vanishing, it was the unburning of a story that refused to be erased. Somewhere, in a basement thick with dust and brittle pages, a light finally clicked off. Not out of victory, but exhaustion. The watchers had lost their cover of silence. The red hoodies no longer marked prey but solidarity. Maeve's story hadn't ended in a headline. It began in every name etched into bark, stitched into fabric, whispered each autumn when leaves begin to fall. 34 years may mark the pattern's pulse, but now the beat has changed. And as the wind moves through the cedar's limbs one final time, what once was a monument to forgetting becomes something else entirely. A vow, a beginning. And as morning breaks again on Devon Road, with dew lacing the grass like tiny ghosts and light angling through the cedar's branches just so, something feels different, not safer, but known. The stories live above ground now, spoken, remembered. And though the shadows will always stretch with time, they no longer stretch unchecked. New families have moved in. Children bike past the old tree, but rarely alone, casting curious glances upward, half unbelieving, half daring. The hollow has become more than archive, it is tradition, a place where fear is met with memory, where the past is not buried but studied like scripture. Maeve's face, once a haunting, is now a sentinel among many, watching over the pages still being written. The door in that final footage remains ajar. The breathing behind it never truly ceased, but for the first time in decades, the town beyond it breathes back. This story, carved in cedar and stitched in red, walks forward now, step by trembling, step not toward closure, but toward vigilance. Because some legends don't end in silence, they end in attention, and in that attention, finally, there is power. So now, the cedar still stands, but it no longer stands alone. Where once there was only silence, there is now voice. Where there was forgetting, now remembrance. Children grow under its shadow, knowing the story not as myth, but as warning. Red is not just a color now, but a vigil. Maeve Donnelly's name, once whispered with dread, is now spoken with purpose. Her image stands guarded in murals, photographs, in the flicker of candlelight on every September 16th. This is how the cycle breaks, not with arrests or answers, but with remembrance louder than the forgetting. Patterns feed on silence, and silence has been broken. Somewhere, a basement may still hum with surveillance. Somewhere, hoodies are still being folded with cruel intent, but for Devon Road, the hold is loosening. For the first time, in a town that once choked on unanswered prayers, the story no longer belongs to the darkness, it belongs to the waking. And the cedar, though ancient and stained, now bears witness not just to sorrow, but to survival. This is not the end of the story, but it is the beginning of the end of its silence. And so, in the quiet between seasons, Devon Road exhales not with peace, but with purpose. The cedar still stands as both sentinel and scar, its roots tangled in decades of names too precious to forget. But now, It grows beneath skies that know the story, in soil touched by hands no longer afraid to dig. The hollow continues to expand, its archives alive with the voices of those left behind and those who chose to return. Across the country, more trees are watched, more patterns uncovered, and while evil, in its cunning, may shift like mist between timelines and symbols, it no longer moves without eyes noticing. Maeve Donnelly remains missing, but her heartbeat echoes in every child kept safer by the truth. This story does not seal shut like a tomb, its ending is a door left ajar, so the next warning can pass through. Let the cedar remember what we refuse to forget. Let remembrance be resistance, and let the shadows know, at last, they are no longer the only ones watching. Somewhere, years from now, when the names have faded from headlines but not from hearts, when the mural's paint begins to peel but the memories remain vivid, a new generation will sit beneath that crooked cedar, pulling at the threads of the old story. They will speak it aloud, not with fear but with reverence. And one child among them, perhaps a sibling of someone lost, perhaps just someone who never stopped wondering, will stand and ask what happened to the girl in the red hoodie. And another will answer not with silence but truth. And in that telling the cycle bends once more, less like a noose, more like a path toward light. Maeve Donnelly's name will be spoken not in mourning but in defiance. Because the story, once buried in basements and shadows, now belongs to everyone. And as the wind weaves through the branches above, the cedar will shiver not with secrets but with stories remembered. This is how legacies are kept. Not in endings, but in the voices brave enough to carry them forward. And so, this tale becomes more than tragedy, it becomes testament. Testament to the voices that rose from ache, to the mothers who never abandoned hope, to the children who dared to remember, and to the cedar tree that once stood as a symbol of silence, but now looms as a monument to truth. In every town where shadows settle patiently, waiting to be seen, Maeve Donnelly's name ripples like a lighthouse through mist, not as myth, as memory. This isn't an ending, nor is it a warning alone. It is a vow bound in red thread and candlelight. No more nameless vanishing, no more sacred silence. The watchers may still linger in the fog, the rituals may whisper through branches in places yet unnamed, but now someone is always watching back. And the cedar, battered, quiet, unyielding, does not forget, nor do we. That is how darkness is undone, not in one moment, but in many, where remembrance becomes louder than fear. That is how the next child is saved, not by miracles, by memory. And perhaps one day, when the last red hoodie is laid to rest, when no more letters arrive sealed in wax, and the silence beneath the cedar finally feels like peace instead of pause, someone will sit at the edge of its roots and listen and hear only wind. No names calling, no footsteps returning, just the creak of old wood resting. Maybe that day is still far from now. Maybe the pattern must still writhe a dozen more times before the rhythm is broken for good. But today, in the golden hush of evening, Devon Road stands differently, not cured, but changed. It has become a place of witness, of warning, of woven names weathering the years like carved runes into bark. And though the watchers may shift, the veil may rise, and basements may breathe again in this place, the names remain, etched, held, defiant. The cycle does not own the silence anymore. It borrowed it, and now we have taken it back. Years from now, when Devon Road is just another street etched into school maps and antique paper routes, some will come searching not for answers, but for understanding. They will stand beneath the cedar, now taller, its bark thick with time, and run their hands along the plaques softened by rain and repetition. A new child might ask, did they ever find her? And someone, an older sibling, a retired officer, or perhaps a librarian from the hollow, will answer, no. But we never stopped looking, and because of that, fewer were lost. This story, once shrouded in mist and silence, will ripple out forever as a river of reminders that watching matters, that remembering is not passive, and that truth, strangled though it may be, will always push toward light. Maeve Donnelly gave no final word, No farewell, but her absence thundered into action. The cedar bears her name and those it never meant to shelter. The story of Maeve was not told to end in despair, but to become a shield of memory wrapped around every child who bikes beneath the trees. In this way, she was never fully taken. In this way, she remains. And perhaps that is how all stories like Maeve Donnelly's must end, not with justice delivered in neat resolution, but with the guardianship of memory transferred across time, person to person, breath to breath. Devon Road may no longer tremble beneath the cedar's shadow, but it remembers, not with fear, but with vigilance. Not in whispers, but in carved names, flickering lights, and voices unafraid to ask why. The tree still stands, not as a monument to what was lost, but as a vow to what will never again be allowed to vanish without a fight. And beneath its limbs, where paper bags once spilled ink onto wet pavement, there now grow wildflowers blooming each year, not despite the past, but because of it. Each petal a whispered name, each root a tether to the truth. Maeve Donnelly's story, bound in red fabric and aching silence, does not gather dust. It gathers strength. And so long as there are those who remember, who name, who listen, the cycle breaks a little more with each sunrise. This is not just an ending. This is what it means to be seen. And so, the red thread winds its final turn for now. Devon Road rests in twilight, not in ignorance or dread, but in something rarer, resolve. What began with ink bleeding into rain and a single blue canvas bag abandoned beneath dawn's hush has become a legacy, not only of loss, but of unyielding attention. Maeve's voice, though never heard again, reshaped the silence. Hers was a vanishing that refused to be swallowed whole, and in every tree that leans too far, in every street where shadow clings too long, there remains a trace of her name, a haunting turned hauntingly human. The watchers are being watched, the archive grows. And in the breath before the next waking, the world dares to remember. Not all stories escape the dark, but this one, threadbare and sacred, found its way to light not with a scream, but with a promise. We remember, we see, we will not look away again. And there, beneath the ageless boughs of the cedar that once devoured whispers and scattered hope, a final name is spoken not in terror, but reverence. The wind bends gently now, not to hush or conceal, but to carry that name across thresholds, coasts, time itself. Maeve Donnelly, not merely a child lost, but a force remembered. Her story, sown through horror and watered by collective will, grows differently now, no longer root-bound in silence, but reaching toward a sky that finally listens. What disappeared on a rainy September morning has returned, fragmented, reshaped, and transformed into legacy. And so long as red hoodies still flutter on fences, as candles flicker under old trees, as names are spoken into the hush before dusk, her story will tether us to that sacred duty, to see, to speak, to remember. Because this is how evil is made helpless, not erased but known. And when the next child stands at the edge of silence, wondering if someone is watching, the wind beneath the cedar will answer, "We are here." And in that final echo beneath the cedar, where roots tangled not just in earth but in memory, the town found something it never expected: clarity. Not resolution, not justice, both too rare, too fleeting, but something truer. A woven knowing that what matters is not how a mystery ends, but how it is remembered, carried, protected. Maeve Donnelly became more than a girl on a bike who vanished. She became the hinge between silence and speaking, between forgetting and steadfast vigil. Her story, heavy with sorrow, bloomed into signal, a flare that warned, a thread that bound. And as dusk unfurls its golden veil once more over Devon Road, and a single candle burns beneath the cedar's watchful limbs, the world leans in not for answers, but for assurance. Because now, when a child vanishes into the morning mist, they do not vanish alone. Foundations have been laid, lights lit, names remembered, and the wind whispers not of endings, but of guardians made from grief, of watchers who have turned their eyes toward the dark and said not again. And so, The story concludes, not with a door slamming shut, but with one left slightly ajar, its hinges rusted with time, its frame swollen with remembrance. Devon Road carries forward, a place once consumed by unspoken horror, now lit with the unwavering flame of memory. The cedar still stands, yes, its twisted limbs locked forever in a kind of reverent grief, but now it blooms with ribbons, not rumors. Under its roots, roots that once wound around the truth like binding cords, there now rests a copper plate etched with every known name, and blank space left behind for the ones yet claimed by time. This is not a fairy tale, nor warning, nor myth. It is the truth, that every silence broken births another light. Maeve Donnelly, unseen but never lost, rides eternally through this story, her shadow woven into each page, read, each name spoken, each vigil held. And while unseen hands may still stitch red fabric in secret corners of the world, they do so under a sky that watches now, and under a tree that no longer hides. The story may rest, but the remembering never will. And so, the final thread is tied not to seal the story, but to hold it open, forever watchful. The tale of Maeve Donnelly, once a whisper on a rain-soaked street, now pulses through communities that choose to remember rather than retreat. Her name is stitched into more than hoodies, it's carved into conscience, spoken into policy, prayed into lullabies. Where once stood shadows, there now flicker thousands of tiny lights, vigil flames, porch bulbs, archival scans, all lit by those who refuse to let silence bloom deeper roots. The cedar still leans, weathered and worn, sentinel to secrets it can no longer conceal. But now, it stands among allies. And if there is any justice in the world of stories, it is this, that children who walk beneath its limbs do so with their names firmly theirs, their roots unbroken, their mornings undisturbed. The watchers still watch, yes, but now they are not alone. Now, the remembering watches back and never blinks. So let this be the ember that refuses to die, the memory of a girl whose silence screamed too loud to be ignored, whose red hoodie became a banner for those who vanished and for those who vowed not to forget. Maeve Donnelly remains, not as a ghost trapped in a past without answers, but as the breath between every name spoken beneath the cedar's grasping limbs. Her legacy, once born of dread, now steadies countless hearts to stand firm in the shadow. Because in every town where the scream never comes, where the door never opens, where the bike makes it home, there is a sliver of power carved from her name. This story does not vanish into myth. It lives in archives, in artwork, in the eyes of those who finally see clearly, and in that seeing, the watchers lose ground, they lose silence, and in the end, they will lose the night. For the story of the girl who disappeared on Devon Road was never just about loss, it was the story that taught the world how to remain. And in this final stillness, where night surrenders to light and memory takes root deeper than forgetting ever dared, the true legacy of Maeve Donnelly endures not as a wound, but as a watchtower. Her story threads through towns once too silent, amplifying each whisper into declaration. Mothers now leave porch lights on, not in desperate hope, but in steadfast promise. Children wear red not just as symbol, but as shield. And in every town where fog curls too thick or trees lean too far, someone remembers, and that remembering is enough to pause the pattern, to fracture its rhythm. The cedar of Devon Road no longer marks the place where a child vanished, but where a nation began to see. It leans still, yes, but no longer alone. Behind every trunk lies witness, every shadow finds voice, and every silence is etched with names we will not let fade. This is where the story rests. This is where we stay. This is where we remember. And so, let the cedar stand eternal, not merely as sentinel to sorrow, but as a monument to those who chose to see. Beneath its knotwork limbs lies not just the ghost of a vanished child, but the tremble of an entire world learning to listen. Maeve Donnelly may never return through the mist that took her, but her story has. Returned in every name remembered, in every child guarded, in every silence now filled with voice. The watchers remain, scattered and silent, but even they must reckon with what the world has become, a chorus of witness. Across states and seasons, the red thread continues to stitch hearts to vigilance, binding the once passive to the now resolute. And Devon Road, damp with morning dew, and thick with names carved in time, exhales at last, not in grief, not even in victory, but in remembrance that refuses to fade. The wind stirs beneath the cedar, and though the story sleeps, the remembering fierce, shining, unbroken, never will. And as the final breath of this long, echoing tale curls into silence, a truth remains etched, not in ink, but in bone. Stories like Maeve Donnelly's don't fade, they fuse into ritual, into resistance, into a collective promise handed down through whispers, archives, wildflowers, and red-threaded names. The cedar may grow older, its bark thick with storms weathered and generations mourned, but it will never again stand unnoticed. Its shadows will never again fall without scrutiny, and through it all, through every looping thread of horror spun across timelines and towns, there pulses a quiet defiance. A girl on a bike, a name whispered through the hush, a candle lit each September, and the unrelenting vow of a world that finally dared to watch, not just for Maeve, but for every child whose mourning never finished. This is how silence is broken. This is how watchers are unraveled. This is how the lost are carried home, not in return, but in remembrance that refuses to die. And so it ends, not with finality, but with a breath held just long enough to matter. Maeve Donnelly's name drifts across time, now a pulse, a whisper, a tether that binds the once fleeting to the firmly remembered. Devon Road, once veiled in fog and fear, now stands in the open, its cedar twisted not just by storms, but by the weight of watching eyes and promises kept. In towns far and near, the echoes of that red hoodie ripple outward across fences, across skies, into homes that sleep more safely because forgetting was refused. The girl who disappeared on a drizzly morning became the girl remembered in the hearts of thousands, her silence threaded into verses of vigilance told beneath trees that no longer hide. So let it be light, not shadow, that now rests beneath the cedar. Let it be voice, not silence, that carries her forward. Because stories like Maeve's do not end. They root, they rise, and they remain.